Hello, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 2, Episode 9, Project Daedalus. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Star Trek Discovery up to Season 2, Episode 9. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, this episode is weird because when I saw the preview for this episode, I was I assumed it wouldn't be good. I assumed I wouldn't like this episode because this episode, it promised it dealt with Discovery going to the base of Section 31. And I have thus far been very unhappy with how they handled Section 31. Now, if you saw my review of last week's episode, I did really enjoy that. I liked it, and I thought, okay, that was just a fluke of it being really good that we're going to get a step down with this episode. Turns out it's not the case. It turns out I like this episode even more than I did the previous episode. And the previous episode I said I thought could be the best episode of the show. So that means I think this episode could be the best episode of the show. Super impressed with this. It was totally not what I was expecting. It tells an amazing character story, several amazing character stories actually, while at the same time feeding into the overall plot of the season with the Red Angel and advancing this plot quite significantly actually. And at the same time, it was a really unique episode. It had some really amazing pacing. Like, I never seemed to drag at any point. Like, even some of the dialogue heavy character moments, like, they didn't seem to intrude on the plot. I think this actually may be the episode that was like the best well written, like best paced, because the pacing was good, everything was well structured, and if this is a sign of, because we hear that the new showrunners took over around episode 7, and so we got last week's episode 8, and this week's episode were both like written extremely well. So this is a sign of the kind of episodes we get with this new writing staff, and that is a very good sign. So, yeah, so I was really impressed with this episode. Now, I didn't realize this at the time of watching this episode. It wasn't until like several hours after I watched it I found out that Jonathan Frakes directed this episode. Now, I mentioned that because I love Jonathan Frakes. Like, I really praised his direction of the season 1 episode he directed, which was my favorite episode of season 1, and then he directed an episode earlier, episode 2 of season 2, which I really enjoyed as well. But I mentioned the fact that I didn't realize it was him because I realized that I believe that it's possible that I could let that bias of like my opinion of the episode, if I know Jonathan Frakes is directing, I might subconsciously like it more and be like, oh, this is going to be awesome because he's directing it. But with this episode, I thought the episode was awesome first, even before I realized that he directed it. And once I realized he directed it, I was like, oh, well, that makes total sense, because the direction in this episode was amazing. It was really good. Now, if you watch my review of last week's episode, I complained about the cinematography, how there was like too many lens flares, and they were just trying to be too artistic when the scene didn't really call for it. So I was actually keeping an eye out for that in this episode, and noticed that the cinematography is actually really good. It wasn't distracting at all, and this was a really well directed episode. So I think a lot of it does come down to the director, and I think Jonathan Frakes is an amazing director, particularly for Star Trek. Anyway, let me get into some of the details of the episode. Let's start with the Spock and Burnham relationship, because we get further development of that, because we get to see Spock on Discovery interacting with the Discovery crew, and we get a few scenes with him and Burnham, and Burnham's trying to help him like regain his composure, his logic, and so she offers to play three-dimensional chess. Now, this of course is a huge, well-known Trekkie Easter egg. The three-dimensional chess, something that's been inherent in Star Trek since the original series. In fact, it was first seen in the very first scene of the pilot of Star Trek that was actually picked up, Where No Man Has Gone Before. So I believe it was one of the first scenes, maybe even the first scene of the episode, because the cage was technically the first pilot, but that wasn't picked up. Where No Man Has Gone Before was the next pilot that was picked up, but it wasn't the first episode that they aired. They actually aired Man Trap first, and then later aired Where No Man Has Gone Before, which makes no sense to me. I always considered Where No Man Had Gone Before the first episode, but getting sidetracked here. The point is, they showed Kirk and Spock playing three-dimensional chess, and they were established Spock as emotionless, because this is establishing the whole thing of Vulcans. I mean, they hadn't even established him as Vulcans as emotionless or suppressing their emotions in the cage. This is something they made up for Where No Man Has Gone Before, where Spock's like, oh yes, your human emotions. And this scene actually reminded me of that a lot, and I think in a very good way, because it was sort of invoking that image, but not sort of playing off of it for nostalgic kicks too much. It felt more natural, and I'm starting to get that. I got that with last week's episode, and I'm getting this with this week's episode, is that because the previous episodes of Discovery, especially in season 1, you got a lot of there's a reference to the original series, where here it seems like the show's getting so much better into blending these references and invoking images or scenes from previous Star Trek series, but making them feel natural for the characters and for the plot, and that's why it's less intrusive and it feels less like a nostalgia moment. So it's really improving. Now, as for the scene itself, Spock is he's kind of being a dick, and he's like purposely trying to lose, and that's pissing Michael Byrne off. And he tries to say, "You're being arrogant for trying to help me," and she's like, "Well, you're being arrogant for thinking you don't need help." So it was a good like sibling, fight, I should say, a disagreement that they definitely don't get along. Now, I've heard some other people criticize Spock for being too much of a dick, but honestly, I always thought Spock was being a dick. If I go back and watch some episodes of the original series, I think, he's kind of a dick, because I think that's just his emotionless nature. It sometimes can be interpreted as, being a dick. And of course, we've established that he doesn't think too kindly of Michael Burnham, so he's being an extra dick to her, so I think it actually makes a lot of sense. I think it works a lot for the character, and I'm actually going to touch on this a bit more later on about what Spock says to her, but for now, let me move on to talk about Section 31 and Admiral Conwell. Now, Admiral Cornwell, I think, is probably my least favorite aspect of this episode, which I still do really love, because to me, she's a character who's kind of a hangover from season 1, and whenever she appeals, she has that season 1 feel to her, and I don't think she quite fits into the new dynamic of Star Trek Discovery, because she's like the stereotypical admiral, kind of like Admiral Ross was on Deep Space Nine, but it seems like the way what she indicates how Starfleet Command is and how Starfleet admirals behave, and which reflect on the nature and the structure of what Starfleet Command is like, I don't think accurately reflects how typical Star Trek treats Starfleet Command or Starfleet admirals or higher ups, if you know what I'm saying. Because I know, granted, we did get a lot of asshole Commodores in the original series and a lot of asshole admirals in Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, but I think for the most part those series portrayed Starfleet as a bit, I don't know, this one is playing a bit more dark and more modern, more militaristic than the other series did. At least season 1 did, and season 2 I think is starting to go beyond that. and portray Starfleet as more in keeping with how previous Star Trek shows have had it. But I think Admiral Cornwell, as I said, I think she's the hangover. She's the what drawback to that still has that season 1 militaristic feel that I don't think portrays the type sort of image. So I honestly, don't particularly like this character. But I thought her interactions with Pike here were actually kind of good. I like how Pike is like, "How dare you, blah blah blah. That's not what the Federation stands for. Is that why you sent me away from the war, because you didn't want me to interfere?" And she's like, "Actually, I sent you away because I knew you were the best of what Starfleet had to offer, and I wanted to make sure you survived the war." And he's like, "Oh, okay." Like that I thought was pretty cool. And it also goes to reinforce like the type of strengthened character that Pike has, which I think should be more reflected in the command staff of Starfleet. But anyway, Section 31, I actually really, not only did I like them in this episode, well, technically they didn't actually appear, but not only did I like them in this episode, but it retroactively makes me feel better about previous episodes, particularly last week's episode, because that was one of the complaints I had about last week's episode, was that the admirals weren't really acting like Starfleet admirals. They were being dicks. Now in that episode, like I said, I didn't think they worked for Section 31 because they didn't have badges. They had the same kind of Starfleet uniforms. But we find out in this episode that they do in fact control Section 31 and in control of Section 31 headquarters. Again, I'm not gonna get into. I'm just sick of bringing this up. The whole inconsistency between Section 31 and established canon. I just accept that doesn't at all fit into canon. This is not Section 31 and will never fit into canon. Can't fit into canon. This is something that Discovery is just doing that's totally incompatible with previous established Star Trek shows, and that's just the way it is, and I accept that now. And so now we have to deal with Discovery's version of Section 31. But even then, I thought they would be wearing at least the Section 31 badges or have a different uniform on. But whatever. We find out in this episode that those admirals that were talking to Georgiou and Leland in the previous episode were in fact at Section 31 headquarters in command of Section 31. But the reason why I say that this episode retroactively makes me feel better about the previous episode is because I was saying, well, those admirals, whatever, it's not acting the way Starfleet admirals would act. And in this episode, you find out it's because they're not. They're not Starfleet admirals. It's the control, I believe they call it, the artificial intelligence, has taken over Section 31, and these are all just holograms. Now, let me get into the control, because this is something I actually didn't notice. I had to watch videos where other people pointed this out, and I think this is something that previous episodes should have handled a bit better, of establishing that there's this artificial intelligence. So they explain it better in this episode, that control is something, artificial intelligence that's the Starfleet brass and admirals and everyone in Section 31, I believe, like feed a lot of information to it, and they don't let it make decisions for them, though. The Starfleet brass make the decisions. They just use it as a tool to collect information, gather data, or whatever, which I don't know, because this is something that's never been established in Star Trek before, which, again, I'm not going to be like, it goes against canon, but I think if they're going to do something that is an original idea that hasn't really been established or explored, I think they should have done a better job establishing it. But regardless of that, so apparently we learned in this episode that the Force, the still unknown Force from the future that we saw take over Arium a couple episodes ago, has taken over control, and that they basically are responsible for everything, like the reason why Section 31 were acting like dicks and trying to hunt down Spock, trying to hinder Discovery from finding the Red Angel and finding out about the signals. We realize that it's this It's because the reason why Section 31 has been such a hindrance is because the control has been taken over by the same artificial intelligence, presumably from the future, that is also taking over Arium. So that made this. So yeah, again, it retroactively means that all the behavior I was saying that was out of character for Starfleet Admirals or for Section 31 actually comes from this thing from the future. Which, again, this not only does that make me feel better about this, but it also ties beautifully into the ongoing storyline, and things are really starting to shape up and develop more. And I love how we found this out. How they were talking. Cornwell was talking about this Admiral Pitar and how she's like this extremist and she doesn't like him. They're gonna have to butt heads with her, and you get a communique for her saying, "Oh, we're gonna cease discovery and arrest everyone, and you're all fugitives," and they send a bunch of mines out to destroy the ship. Which at first, when I first saw these things, I was very much against it. I was like, "This is ridiculous. This Starfleet Admiral trying to like destroy a Federation ship," but as I said, this is all alleviated when they make it clear that when Burnham goes to the station and finds that Admiral Pitar is actually dead, and all those other Admiral dudes, Dan Dory and Tellarite that we saw in the holograms talking to Section 31, they're all dead. So it's just the artificial intelligence mimicking them, using holograms to mimic them. In fact, like the recording that shows Spock killing people, which Admiral Cornwell played for Pike and everyone, that's all holograms too, created by the artificial intelligence. So for some reason, this artificial intelligence wants to stop Spock, and they wanted Section 31 to basically kill him. So we're still not sure what the AI's relation is with Leland and the actual human figures of Section 31. Are they aware that control is taken over by this evil force from the future? Are they just not aware? They're just complicit because they think. But why are they really taking orders from control? It didn't seem like that was work. Or maybe, as I said, like we saw them talking to admirals, so they think they're taking orders from admirals, not control. But still, you have to wonder how much do they know, or are they just that naive? That's something that I'm looking forward to the show getting more into and explaining a bit more. Cool. So now let's get into the heart of this episode, as Arium. Now, Arium was a background character who ever since season 1 was some sort of robot android looking thing, but we find out more in this episode. It's more she was human who's been augmented by cybernetic enhancements after a shuttle accident. And so in season 1, she was just appeared in the background being like, "Yes sir, no sir," and "Oh, we have the sensor blah," and that's about it. In season 2, started to flesh her and all the other bridge characters out a bit more. They had more to do, more interactions with the crew, but still, they never really got into exploring her character very well. And so I've heard some other reviews, other opinions of people who thought that they couldn't get into this episode because it was all about her tragic death, and some people were like, they couldn't affect me because I didn't know who this character was, or didn't really connect with this character at all. So it seemed like they were trying to get me to feel sad for her when I have no idea who she is. But I actually disagree personally with that mindset, because I think this episode, her story in this episode and her tragic story is so self-contained, it doesn't really matter how well established she was in previous episodes. I mean, let me put it to you this way. If this character was never seen on the show before, or maybe a few episodes back when they established that thingy takes over her, but if she was never seen before that, and it was just like a one-off character, like a guest star who's appearing in one episode, it would have been just as effective. You don't need to actually establish this character, because the way they tell her story in this episode, how it starts with her, it explains, she has a scene with her and Tilly, it explains, showing like what her images, the video image of when she, before the accident, when she was fully human, and how her and her husband on the beach, and then how what her life on Discovery is now like, showing them how she's had a really close relationship with Tilly and Detmer and other people, and how she feels about them, and it does a really good job of showing her interaction with them, and how close she's come to the crew in this one episode. Just pretend, as I said, pretend nothing of the previous show ever existed, and this is a one-off guest star. She's just in this episode. This one episode does such a good job of establishing her character, her background, what she's like, her relationship with the crew, and that way when we get to the end and we get the tragic death and we get what it means, we get Tilly reconnecting with her, and we get her willing to sacrifice herself to save the crew, it all totally works. You totally buy it. You don't need to know anything about this character before this episode for this to work, and for her death to be very emotionally impactful, very tragic. And yes, I must admit, I did shed a few tears during that death scene. I think this is one of the most effective death scenes in all of Star Trek. And I don't care that this is not a well-established character. It doesn't matter. Her death was actually like maybe 10 times more impactful than Jadzia Dax, a character who I cared very much about. From Deep Space Nine, but because it's the one episode, as I said, if you just think of it as a guest star, and some people are like, well, they're just going to introduce this character and all of a sudden she has this relationship with Tilly. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. It's just, I don't know. Like, I do think that if they had established her more in previous seasons and we did know more about her, it may heighten the death, because not only would it be this one episode, it would also be a beloved character we're losing. But as it stands, it's not really a beloved character we're losing. Like, I don't care about her the same way I cared about like other characters who died, like the way Spock died in Star Trek 2 or something like that, because it's not like, oh, I love this character so much, how dare they kill her off. Like, if they kill off Saru, like they sort of teased that in the previous episode, that would be a lot more impactful in terms of that's a great character who works well with the show, who I've grown to care about. And so with Ariam, her death doesn't work in that way, because she's not like this well-established character that I care about, because I don't really know her. She's been in the background. But it does work in terms of this one episode and this one story. But I do think if you did have both of those connections, if you had this great episode, great story, plus this well-established character that you're sad to lose, then it would be even more impactful. So I do get that. I do see that this could have been even better had they taken the time to establish her more and get the audience to care about her. But I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's required, particularly to make this an amazing episode, to make that a very emotionally impactful death scene, which was just absolutely brilliant. And there's a few things that they did to set this up. As I said, I think this was a beautifully paced episode, beautifully structured episode. I love how they tease with things where Ariam is sort of taken over by you see the red dots or whatever in her eyes, so it shows that she's taken over by the evil AI. I just call it that for lack of better terms until we get one. And you see her with the, what's-her-face from the Enterprise, who's the Barzan, and she's like, oh, you're a Barzan, you need that breathing apparatus to help you breathe. She's like, yeah, well, I don't know, just noticing it. So, I mean, I think that was actually really good foreshadowing when they're on the thing. And it was actually also hinted to her that there's something up with Ariam. Now, I heard some other opinions of people who thought, oh, why did they even bother with doing this foreshadowing that she could tell something was wrong with Ariam if nothing ever came of it? But I disagree. I don't think you need to have anything come of it, because I think it's tension building. It's building the tension and showing that she's suspicious, and that things are definitely going to come to a head. The fact that she wasn't the one who found Arian Mata with someone else, I don't think that matters. I think it all worked in the excellent structure of this episode. And plus, as I said, the whole thing about saying, oh, you need that thing to breathe, great foreshadowing when they got there and she just ripped it off of her. You could say that was like obvious exposition so the audience could know, hey, guess what, she needs the thing to breathe. But I actually think it works in both regards. I think it works well as just simple foreshadowing for the story of what's going to happen. And also, I love the interactions between her and Tilly. And when Tilly was the one who was able to break her free of that AI control, so she could snap out of it, but not entirely. Because if she snapped out of it entirely, she's like, "Oh, I'm okay now. I can open the door." I think that would be ridiculous. Just Tilly talking to her is going to make the AI thing go away. That would be silly. But that's not what they did. They made it so she could temporarily snap out of it. And the fact, of course, Tilly was sending her the memories, because we saw that the evil AI made her dump all of her memories, which is, again, another thing that was perfectly established for her, where we saw that she could choose which memories to hold on and which ones not to, which I did really enjoy. I thought that was really cool. So anyway, so when that scene came when Tilly was like, I'm going to send you these memories and we have this connection, it was earned. It was really well earned, and I totally bought that they could snap her out of it temporarily, just enough to say, hey, kill me, but not solve the issues everywhere. So I thought that was actually done amazingly beautiful. Well, and by the way, I had to mention the Easter egg here for Voyager fans, is that in several scenes, Tilly talked about Catascot and said, oh, I can beat you in Catascot, and Detmer's like, I'm not going to play you in Catascot anymore, just like I don't play Arian because you guys are kick my ass too much. Now, Catascot was actually, we've seen it in Voyager, mainly it was Naomi Wildman would play it. Mainly it was 7 of 9. We got a lot of scenes of 7 of 9 playing Catascot with Naomi Wildman, who was I think a 4 or 5 year old. So I always thought of it as a kid's game. I think Neelix played it with Naomi sometimes as well. In fact, I think Neelix might have actually played 7 once. Oh, they played over the phone once Neelix stayed in the Delta Quadrant. But I always associate it with Connect 4. Personally, it seemed like one of those. It was different than Connect 4, but it's one of those board games with the things. And I love the mention of it here. That is, but Tilly was talking about being a champion. Oh, but it seems like it's kind of like someone saying they're a champion of Monopoly or Connect 4. In my opinion, it's kind of like a kid's game. At least that's how I thought of it. But I still, I'm not saying it's inconsistent, because you can still be a champion of Monopoly. So I still think it worked. I still liked it. I thought it was a great way to humanize her and establish the relationship and tie it into the Star Trek universe. So thumbs up all around. So let's get into this final scene with Michael Burnham. I love how, because Pike was going to send Saru on the away team, which is going by the Next Generation rules, which frankly I think they should. I think the original set of rules where the captain, first officer, and doctor went down on every mission was a bit stupid, which is why they stopped doing it in Next Generation and other stuff, because everyone's criticizing that. It's like your whole command staff is just going to go down to a dangerous situation and leave the ship. So I'm happy with them going to next gen DS9 Voyager rules, would make a lot more sense, where the captain stays on the ship, first officer goes on the away team, and so his first instinct was Saru, because Saru is the first officer, but Saru of course was working on figuring out the whole thing about the holograms, so he wanted to stay behind so he could work on that, and so he was like, okay, Michael Burnham, you're up. So I think that's pretty much established in that she's the second officer. That was never officially established. In fact, I don't know. I think maybe didn't they give her rank back at the end of season 1, where they gave her that medal and had that stupid cheesy ceremony? I I don't know. I can't remember. But I think it's clear that she is the second officer, because once Saru said, "No, I'm too busy," Pike then turned to Burnham, and I do like that. I like that it wasn't even meant to. I'm not even supposed to be here. It wasn't even meant to be Burnham down on the away team. But Ariam, of course, had to go because she suggested, and she's like, "Oh, I have the skills, whatever." But it's really the evil AI who wanted to transmit the data from the thingy, that they got all the knowledge or whatever. And again, I love how it's keeping continuity. It's tying into previous episodes. But anyway, so he gets Burnham on the planet, or not planet, sorry, the base, Section 31 base with Ariam. And this scene was just so amazing. It was so good, like, as far as, like, suspense, tension building is like all AAA plus. It was all 100%. This is like the whole structure of it. It was like one of the most super intense, engaging like scenes I've seen in any Star Trek ever. But again, it's really emotionally impactful, not just for the Ariam story, which was extremely tragic, but also for the Michael Burnham story. This episode, I think, has done more to develop Michael Burnham's character than any episode previously. In fact, like if those people who are complaining that barely knew Ariam and saying, "Well, how am I supposed to feel sad over her death?" But the thing is, you don't really need to feel sad for Ariam from her perspective or knowing her character. You feel sad for Michael Burnham and knowing her character, which has been firmly established, who is someone you care about. And the scene where she was ordered by her captain to kill her friend, like, that was such a great, powerful scene. This is something that I think has been missing in Star Trek, because Star Trek is often teased at scenes like this. They will tease like that someone will have to order someone that they love or that they like or that they're close to their death. Like, this was teased at Next Generation, where Counselor Troy had to take these tests on the holodeck to become a commander, and the way to solve the test was to order Geordi to his death. But of course, it was just holograms. It was just a test. It wasn't actually real life. So it was what I mean by teasing it. And there's probably other situations that I'm not remembering specifically, but there was also similar where someone had to order them to their death, but then they came up with a brilliant solution to save their lives at the last minute, or for some reason they actually didn't die and they came back and they were fine, everything is okay, and happy ending, hugs and everyone around, smiles, great happy ending. I love that they avoided that trope. I love that this is like the first time really that I can recall in all of Star Trek where they actually stuck with it. They didn't fake it out. They didn't be like, and because when Michael Burnham was like, "No, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go," she starts shooting at the door. "I'm going to go find another way." Most other Star Trek episodes, she would find another way and save Ariam. That's it. I love how they didn't cop out. That's if they would have copped out. I know some people were disappointed of Ariam dying just because she wasn't that well developed, and they would have liked her to be developed more before killing her off. But I think at this stage, had they copped out and kept Ariam alive, it would have been much worse storytelling. I think it was very bold, it was very risky to just go ahead and go forward and be like, "No, this brilliant other plan I'm going to come up with to save Ariam's not going to work." Because the only solution is to kill your friend. That's the only way to get around it. And that was so, and I love how they stuck to it. They stuck to their guns. Now, the reason why I say this scene develops Michael Burnham, and this ties, again, I said I was going to touch on this later, is the thing with Spock, the chess game, what Spock was saying to Michael Burnham, saying that she feels that she carries the weight of everyone on her shoulders. She feels that she's responsible for everything. And he brought up her parents, and which was very tragic. And he's saying, you blame yourself for not helping them, but realistically there was nothing you can do. And that sort of defined her character, and I think that's why it was important to show that in the episode, because that defined her character going forward, and how she's trying to save Spock is because she's taking the burden of like saving everyone and protecting everyone on her shoulders. And that's exactly what she was doing with Ariam, that she refused. It was like she couldn't possibly save she couldn't possibly let her die. And she couldn't possibly be responsible for her death. There had to be another way out. She blinded herself to the fact that there wasn't another way out. And that everyone else, like Pike, and again, this speaks well of what a great commander, what a great captain that Pike is, because he was able, he had the right stuff. He was able to order an officer to kill another officer in order to save the ship. Which is, again, a really tough decision, but he knew it was the only thing to do. But Burnham just didn't have that in her. So that's a character flaw. And this is, anyone who says Michael Burnham's Mary Sue, this episode is, proves that wrong, which I never really believed in the first place. But this shows Michael Burnham as a very flawed character, because if that, other, what's-her-face, the Barzan lady, if she didn't wake up and push the button, Michael Burnham would be dead, Discovery would be destroyed, and the AI would wipe out all of this human race. So Michael Burnham would have doomed the entire human race to extinction, or at the very least, she would have doomed herself to death, she would have doomed her ship, and her crew, and everyone she cared about. They all would have died because of her. Michael Burnham would have killed everyone. It was only because that other lady woke up that they managed to save him. And the reason why her flaw is that she can't admit failure. She can't feel like she's let someone down. She always feels like she has to make things right. And that's why I say this episode did much more to develop her character, more so than any other episode. And of course that ending, this is such the most beautiful, most impactful way to end it, is to show Arian floating in space and then have that memory play as she died. And then the music, and then they swelled up the music, and then they cut the credits, and there was no music, just silence. Beautiful. This episode was constructed so beautifully well. And then, of course, it ties into the greater story, because we get a couple of drops towards the end where Ariam is saying that the evil AI, again, lack of a better term, wants to kill Michael Burnham. She's like, it wanted me to kill you. And again, this sort of ties it in. I think everyone's kind of figuring this out, except for Spock, who's being a bit obtuse, is that he thinks the Red Angel is all about him, but it's actually seeming to be all about Michael Burnham. Michael Burnham is appearing to be the key to everything. And I still do hope that it's not because future Michael Burnham is a Red Angel. I still hope they don't do that. But regardless, she somehow is the key. Because if you think of the AI, the evil AI, and the Red Angel as opposing forces, like on opposite sides, that's why the evil AI wants her dead. And the Red Angel wants her alive because the Red Angel got Spock to save her life, and is protecting her. So she's definitely the key. So that's bringing up interesting prospects, and of course, name drop of Project Daedalus, which is the name of the episode. Yet we have no idea what the hell that is. It's obviously a breadcrumb to set up future storylines to see where things go, which I actually think was done amazingly well. I thought this whole episode was amazing. Now, one other thing I want to talk about before I go is the short trek Calypso. Because the more I think, because at first I was like, oh, this is going to have nothing to do with anything. It's just a stupid short that they just get out to be all artsy. But, as the season went on, I was like, actually, maybe this is going to tie into what they're going to do in this season. Now, I am convinced 100% that it most definitely is going to tie into the show. In fact, they had an artificial intelligence that was Discovery. Discovery was kind of alive with the artificial intelligence, was in control of Discovery 1,000 years in the future. And it was waiting for something like it met this dude and fell in love with him, but he was like, why don't you take me to the planet? He's like, no, Discovery can't go anywhere because I have orders to sit here and wait. And he's like, well, everyone who gave you the orders died thousands of years ago. And it's like, no, I still have to sit here. So the artificial intelligence, I think Zara, it called herself, I think a lot of people had speculated that that could be Arium, and I think those speculations are right, because if you notice, and this is kind of like what Nemesis was setting up for, but they never actually did. The movie Nemesis was setting up for like Data coming back to life as before, because Data downloaded all of his memories and consciousness into before he died. I think it's something similar with Arium, because as we said, the evil AI dumped all of her memory core into Discovery before it left, because it wanted room to take all the, that knowledge or whatever that it was trying to get. So, basically, we know that Arium, all of her memory, all of her essential whatever is in Discovery. So I think it is very likely that that will somehow morph, because even in that episode, in the short Trek Calypso, it talked about how it was evolving over the years. So it took many years to evolve. So I do believe that that was the end result of like thousands of years of evolution of Arium's memories becoming this new sentient AI, Zara. So mark my word. And also, I do think we are going to get back to this mission. This mission, because for the short Trek Calypso, when I saw that, I thought the mission was just a red herring. I thought that Discovery was just going to sit there forever and nothing was going to, it was just being stupid by saying, oh, I have my mission, I can't go anywhere. But now, I'm convinced that it is going to, because now we know that time travel is involved. I do believe that maybe Pike, maybe Burnham, maybe the Red Angel, someone is going to time travel into Discovery, and it needs to be there in order for it to do its mission. So I do think we are going to see what that mission is later in the season. At least that's my speculation, that's my guess. Anyway, my rating for Project Daedalus out of 10 is a 10, the best. I do think this is an amazing episode of a Discovery, nearly flawless. Like, my issues with this episode are so small, they're barely worth mentioning. I think this was, as I said, most well-written, well-directed, well-acted. It was beautifully structured, beautifully put together to have a very emotional, high-impact ending that's probably one of the best endings of any show I have seen all year. Well, including last year, because this year was like, oh, all year there's only 2 shows. No. Not the calendar year, but going back a year. This was an absolutely amazing episode. Anyway, that is it for my review for Project Daedalus. I will be back next week for cover the future episodes of Discovery, which I am now very much looking forward to. If the next episodes follow suit with these past two, this is going to be a fucking amazing half season, I will tell you that much. Anyway, be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover that. Also, check out my channel for many more Star Trek reviews. I also do many other videos and other shows like Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Lost, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.